After serving as a broker for his own firm for many years, and his company merging with SVN, Reid Bennett is currently the National Council Chair for the Multifamily Division of the company. With 225 offices around the country and 266 multifamily-focused advisors, Reid has a good grasp of the multifamily market all over the country. Reid sees many parallels between 2008 and our current economic environment. In this episode, we discuss how he set seller and buyer expectations, rent collection strategies, and why he feels now is the best time to get started in real estate. All right, so welcome back to another episode. Today we have Reid Bennett joining us from Chicago. Reid, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Dion. Appreciate you having me on.
Thank you for joining us. So, Reid, why don't we go ahead and let our listeners know a little bit about your background and how you got into real estate, doing what you're doing now?
Sure. Well, actually, so I graduated from University of Iowa in 1998, and then kind of screwed around as a ski bum for a while in Colorado. When I got back into Chicago, I had a personal training studio at LaSalle and Wacker, downtown Chicago, and a lot of my clients were either attorneys or in the real estate world. And I'll never forget one of my clients, he would come down and he would show me the checks that he was making off of real estate deals. And each one of his checks were either, double or triple what I make a year. And I was like, if this guy can do it, anybody can do it, kind of thing. So then I got into multifamily brokerage in about 2001 in Chicago in the neighborhoods. And during that time period, the condo conversion craze was really ramping up. And so I was learning, I would say from 2002 through 2007, everything I sold was basically to a condo converter. And the way that I was looking at it, I thought that every single apartment unit in all of the Chicagoland area was going to be converted into a condo. And so I didn't even know how to underwrite a deal from a numbers perspective. I only knew that I would take a little a laser, and I would measure all of the units, all of the unit sizes, because that's all the condo converters cared about is, how big are the units, how big are the rooms, and what can I do to create those rooms or create new bedrooms. And so that's all I was doing for probably the first 6 years of my career. And then when that kind of started to fizzle out, because at one point I had 176 condo converters in my database on the northwest side of Chicago alone.
Wow.
Which is, when I look back at that, it's so ridiculous because the condo conversion market is totally dead. In fact, here in Chicago, everybody is deconverting the condos back into apartments because they're worth more, which is it's absolutely insane. And then we moved on. At one point when it started to fizzle out, I remember we had a client that had a 60-unit deal here, and he was telling me, and he would always pat his pocket, and he'd said, this property's given me $70,000 cash, and he would pat his pocket. And then I started with the CCIM classes and really learning how to underwrite these deals. And I said to him, well, I think that is giving you a 1% return on your money. He said, what do you mean? I said, well, I think your building is worth, somewhere around $7 million. And he said, no way. And so we ended up selling that deal for him and getting him into 280 units of garden style apartment complexes. And then that's when I kind of realized and understood that in order to maintain in this business, we had to move into the garden style apartments in the suburban markets. And that's what we did at that point. And that was 2008. Mm-hmm. And then from there, we bought into a franchise because I kept getting kicked out of listings because we were just a local brokerage firm in Chicago. There were 7 of us, and I'll never forget the specific deal. It was a 100-unit deal in Indiana, and I had a client of mine that said, "I know that you track every single one of these deals across the Midwest. Do you know who owns this deal?" I said, "Yes, I know who owns that deal." And they said, "We want to buy it." So I drove out to the gentleman's office that owned it, and I said, "I have a client that is very interested in this property. Would you consider an offer?" He told me, "Yes, I would accept." I think at that time it was a $5 million offer, so it was $50,000 a unit. And I brought him in $4,950,000 as an initial offer. Mm-hmm. And he said, at this time I was in my mid-20s, and he said, "Hey, look, kid, I didn't think you were going to bring me this offer." He said, "Once you did, I looked at my management agreement, and my management agreement said that I have to list this property with a nationally recognized firm, so I cannot accept your one-off offer." So at that point, then I got into, we started looking around at the national firms who we could affiliate with, and there weren't a lot of opportunities at that time unless we wanted to go with one of the groups that was, a corporate group and just jump in. Mm-hmm. But we wanted to maintain our own office. So at that time, the company was Sperry Van Ness. We bought into the franchise. We took over the multifamily section because there were two of us in the office, or two offices in Chicago, and we had the exclusive rights to the multifamily sector. And then in 2013, we merged with another group downtown, which is now the downtown office of SVN, is what we're called now. And then in, I wouldn't say 2014, I took over as the National Council Chair for multifamily. We have about 225 offices around the country. We have about 266 multifamily focused advisors around the country. Mm-hmm. And what we do is we have a monthly call. We discuss, all the metrics, everything that's going on within the multifamily realm across the country. Mm-hmm. That's a long-winded answer for your first question. But.
Well, I mean, no, it's great. You provide a lot of detail. I mean, it seems as though now you guys have quite a large reach then. So I'm sure that gives you a really nice, broad perspective of the market as a whole. So out of curiosity too, because I've spoken to other brokers as well. So why did you choose multifamily in particular and not some other sector like industrial or even, triple net, like some of the other guys that I've spoken to before?
Sure. Well, multifamily had always interested me, and my roommate in college, actually, he started investing in Iowa City. Actually, he started buying homes, and then he got into multifamily, and he was the first one to ever tell me, "You have to read this book called Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki." I'm sure you've read it. Mm-hmm. And that book really opened my eyes. And for me, multifamily was what I wanted to initially start investing in before I ever even got into brokerage, just because I could understand it. I could understand that if I bought a 3-flat and lived in one of the units, the other 2 would pay for most of the building and most of the expenses. And then it just seemed like a natural, that's what I could understand. And I knew nothing about retail, office, industrial. Over the course of my early career, I started to try to do GSA deals and medical office here and there. But what I really realized was once I started dabbling into those asset classes, I realized there were 5 or 6 groups that's all they did was focus on it. Mm-hmm. And so rather than try to be a jack of all trades, and we call it the shiny object syndrome, where you kind of chase what's the hottest asset class in the market, I was aligned with a brokerage house that's all they did was multifamily when I first got into it. So it's all that they knew. It's all that I learned that way. And once I realized that, and even in multifamily, you have student housing, you have seniors housing, you have workforce housing, there's affordable housing. I mean, there's a ton of niches within multifamily as well. And so it seems like the more you get involved in a certain asset class, the more you need to even specialize to a greater extent within that asset class. And the one thing that I like about multifamily, so especially in this era, retail, everybody is shopping virtually, especially today. Amazon and the like. We don't even leave our house to go buy batteries, or even at this point buy food. So retail, I was a little bit nervous about trying to get into that because I knew that space was changing. Office, kind of the same thing. I mean, we're sitting here right now having a virtual meeting. This would not have happened 10 years ago in my world. So office, I think that the face of that is going to change. And then you get to multifamily. You can't live virtually yet. So there's always going to be a demand. There's always going to be the need for housing. And, we switched over, I think, after the Great Recession of 2008, 2009 to be a renter nation. And that hasn't changed over the last 10 years. And I think with what's going on now, it's definitely going to keep that going on for the foreseeable future. So affordable housing and workforce housing and the need for apartment units is never going to be greater. So we're never going to run out of product. We can't build enough. The country is not building enough units to keep up with the demand. So it's just something that I've said, this is what we're going to focus on. And once you start focusing on a certain niche, I think within real estate, the sky kind of becomes a little bluer because you don't have to have your head down in 4 or 5, 6 different asset classes. I know there are a lot of people that do that, and I have no idea how they're able to maintain knowledge in all of those asset classes. So multifamily is the section that I'm focused on, and I'm tracking across the country.
Now, you mentioned to me earlier that you yourself are also invested in multifamily real estate assets as well, right? So
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about your experience from the investor or the investment perspective?
Sure. The deals that I invest in are typically with clients of mine. I have not, at this point, I don't compete with the clients that I deal with on the multifamily side. I only partner with them. There was a property that we closed in 2008. It was a 144 unit deal. And actually, I was selling that deal to a client of mine, and he didn't have enough funds to close the deal because his main investor had passed away. And at that point, we said, well, and I believed in that deal. I try to not sell any deal that I wouldn't invest in myself. It just makes it easier for me to understand the deal and makes it easier for me to get clients interested in the property. So this deal, I totally believed in it. It was 18 different buildings. It was a garden-style apartment deal. The 18th building, the previous owner had tried to condo convert the deal, that unity. So he started with that, and all he did was make simple adjustments. He found that the condo market was soft. So what he did was that 18th building, he put about $3,000 a unit into it. It didn't need a lot. It was a mid-90s build. So all he did was change the fixtures and, upgrade the appliances in the kitchen. And what I noticed was once he couldn't sell them as condos, he put them back on for rent, and he was getting about $150 to $160 more a unit. So what I saw in that was, look, if you continue that program where you put $3,000 a unit into the rest of the properties, excuse me, you're going to, increase the value of this deal well over $1.5 million, $2 million. So I believed in it. So what we ended up doing was we raised money. He needed, I'll never forget the number, it was $1,560,000. And he was going to put some of his money into it. And so we raised the money between 5 of us. My mom, she's a retired preschool teacher. When my grandfather passed away, she had a little bit of money. So I invested that money into it. And the way we set that up, it was a 5-year deal, and it was going to be about a 20% cash on cash return.
Wow.
So you double your money. I mean, it's not a home run, but it was a pretty good return at that point. So we doubled everybody's money in 5 years. And then that really caused me to say, look, anytime we're selling a deal, and if the buyer wants us to invest with them, we'd be happy to do that. We just invested another group that we sold 7 apartment deals for. They came up with an off-market deal on their own in Texas. And we went to actually for the closing dinner for the 7 deals that we closed with them. One of the principals said, I have this deal. Do you track in this market in Texas? I said, actually, yeah, I do. I have all the information about these complexes. And so I sent all that information. He said, where do you think this deal should trade? I kind of told him. He said, well, I have it under contract for about 60% of that number. I said, really? So at that point, he said, hey, do you want in on this deal? I said, yeah, I'll go in on it with you. And just because I knew who he was, how he was going to run this deal. I actually introduced the manager to him that he uses now. So I know his manager, and I knew what his manager could do once I had talked to him about that deal. Specifically, I don't know how much detail you want me to get into, but the manager said, when I went on site, I opened up a drawer and I saw 60 applications that they hadn't done anything with. And there were at the time 70 vacancies. So he said, all I'm going to do, and these are dated within the last 5 months, they're not doing anything with them. So with that particular property, we just invested with them a little over a year ago. And so now we're running about 90% occupancy on that. I actually had a contract for about double. I would say the contract was delivered March 6th. So everything's kind of a little bit on hold with that right now because but anyway, those are 2 specific examples I can think of right now that I've invested with just with clients of ours.
So that brings me to this next question, because I've seen this kind of floating out there before as well. And even myself, I've asked myself this too, just because, I spent 5 years in real estate brokerage and I did, both commercial and residential. Although I let my licenses lapse, I just decided I didn't want to keep them anymore. So I'm sure there are people out there that may wonder, is it beneficial for them to also get a license and get linked up with a broker as well? What's your thoughts on that?
Unless you're going to be in the business and represent others on the acquisition and disposition of assets, I would say it would not behoove you as an investor to get your license. Because then you have to adhere to the fiduciary responsibilities associated with a license and representing one side or the other. Every time we've invested in a deal, we've made sure that actually the only 2 that I just talked about, they were off-market deals. So we had no fiduciary responsibility to a seller entity in that point. So I think it gets a little bit hairy, and I know a lot of people do it, but if you have a fiduciary responsibility to a seller and you're listing that property, I think you'd have a hard time investing in that deal with the buyer. Kind of, seems like that would be a little bit of a conflict of interest there. But so I would say if you're merely investing in deals and selling your own deals, I would not say you would need a license to do that.
Okay. Now, I'm sure another question, because you mentioned these 2, they were off-market deals, right? So right. Probably a great question people might have right now would be, how exactly or what advice would you give to people for sourcing off-market deals in this type of economy?
Well, um, there's a number of ways to do it, and an off-market deal can be brought by brokers. I mean, because we're out there as brokers talking to the owners and operators, and oftentimes you'll find an owner that says, "I'm not listing my property, and I'm not paying you," to the broker. Excuse me. In that instance, it's an off-market deal, but a broker can be involved. So, I mean, we've done that a number of different times where we have clients of ours that are saying, "Hey, you go find me the deal. I'll pay you the fee, or I'll give you, a piece of the deal." And so, in that case, I think it's good to link up with a broker to find off-market deals, because the brokers are the ones that are talking daily. I mean, I'm trying to have um, 8, 9, 10 conversations a day with owners and operators in my market. So, I mean, you add that up, multiply that by a week, by the month, and you can see how many people and owners and operators that I'm talking to as an advisor or broker. I'm going to come up with people like that they're very hesitant. They don't want to put their property on the market, or maybe they have a brother-in-law that's a broker that they don't want to list the deal with, but they're saying, "Yeah, go ahead and bring me an offer." So in that case, I think it's a way to find off-market deals. Sometimes off-market deals are tough, because you don't know exactly if you're dealing with a seller that has the correct motivation to sell, or if they're just kind of seeing what their property is worth. And so you can waste a lot of time with off-market deals, because typically, if a seller has a property listed and you're looking at a deal on the market, they're somewhat committed to selling the property and motivated to sell the property. You can never really tell with an off-market deal what the motivation is, unless you can uncover that by talking to the owner at that point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm smiling because everything that you said is like taking me back to those days in New York. And I mean, I've heard a lot of that too. Hey, yeah, I'm interested in selling, but I'm not going to list it with anybody right now. But if you have a buyer,
Right.
bring me one.
Well, and then that's the other thing. And then even if they say that, then you say, "Okay, well, what price range works for you, would make it?" I have no idea.
Yeah.
I have no clue. And then you bring them an offer. You bring them a $10 million offer, and they're like, "No, I want at least 12.5." It's like, okay, so you know what number it was that you wanted. So it's just interesting psychology with the off market deals.
Yeah, it really is. So throughout this experience, because I know you've been doing this for quite a long time, actually. So throughout your experience, what would you say was kind of one of the biggest challenges that you've ever been faced with?
Wow. Well, I think the biggest challenge was probably the 2008, 9, and 10 markets. Just because, in our market, the activity was down about 73%, but there were still all of the same brokers and buyers in the business trying to transact deals for that, 27% that were actually being closed. And, during that time frame, we thought that it was, okay, let's just ride this out. It'll probably be 6 months before we can make this correction and kind of get in the backside of this. Well, it ended up being 2 years. And, that challenge to try to get through 2 years of sales and trying to figure out where the market was. I mean, I'll never forget, we had a deal on the market. It was a 100-unit deal. We had it listed for $6.6 million, so $66,000 a unit. And we had brought them an offer, and I want to say it was May of 2008 of $6.2 million. And so they said, "No, we want 6.4 minimum." And I could actually see, and they were slow sellers to realize what the market was doing, but I could see the market was just diving slowly. And what we called, 2008 was kind of like slowly falling down the stairs. Whereas this market right now, with what's going on with this virus, it's like the 20th floor is imploding to the ground floor. So during that slow fall down the stairs, we had a number of people that were sellers that were, used to a hot market from 03, 04, 05, 06, 07, where it just kept going up. Or they just said, if we hang on, we'll get a higher price. Well, that offer, when they finally said, all right, we'll engage at 6.2, we'd go back to the seller and he'd say, or to the buyer, and they'd say, well, we're at 5.8 now. So we have to go back to the seller and say, they're at 5.8. It's like, no, we're at 6.2. And then they'd finally come back and say, all right, we'll engage them at 5.8, like 2 weeks later. And then they said, we're at 5.5. I mean, it was, we likened it to, if you miss the bus, you're trying to catch up to the next bus stop. And by the time you get to that bus stop, the bus is already gone. I mean, that was the challenge that we had. And it was very difficult to understand how long that was going to last and when it was going to come back, and how you had to change your business and your outlook of what you were doing, from talking to owners and operators and trying to sell their property, to now I'm talking to banks, and all of the lenders were now switched over to what was called special assets. And so you're trying to find who's the head of the special assets, and every broker in the world is doing the same thing. And so it was just a frenzy, and it was a big challenge to our business at that time.
So how would you or how did you go about setting up the whole like expectations for both parties at that time? Because I would assume you kind of had to do a little bit of extra legwork on setting up their expectations, so that way you could at least try to get them closer to an agreeable number as quickly as possible.
Yeah, well, it really went from, if you didn't have to sell during those periods, you weren't selling. So it was more at that time of kind of what it is now in this market is, how can I help you, kind of understand what's going on in the market. And it was more of just educating, and here are the transactions that are happening. Here's why they happened. And, it was really talking about how to maintain occupancy at that time, and, how to, well, not a lot of people had capital sitting there, because I remember all the lenders were now saying, if you had a loan that was coming due, the lenders were saying, all right, we need you to come in with an extra, $1 million, and then we'll give you a new loan. Well, nobody at that time had $1 million laying around, so they had to really figure out how to work with the lenders. But what was the advice we were giving people then? We were just trying to hang on for life for ourselves. It was like, it was more of that. It was more of just, make sure that you are kind of tightening up, because we're going to come out of this kind of like now. We're going to come out of this situation. There are a lot of parallels. It's kind of crazy. Maybe you're hearing that too from a lot of people you're talking about, but it's more, do the things during this time frame when the market's not in this frenzy where all these buyers are coming to the table and deals are happening and you're missing the deals. Do all the things that you wish you could do and didn't have time during those time periods. Set up new systems for your tenants. Switch over to that platform that you didn't have time to do when you were in big acquisition mode. Things like that you just didn't have time to do when the market was hot.
How do you see, this scenario playing out? Because, it is a little, there are some parallels, but it is right. A little different than 2008. 2008 was a little bit of a more gradual, collapse, leading up to that. But right. Here, like you said, we just see a complete halt, to economic activity. So, what do you see right now? What are you guys seeing, your team and everyone across the country?
Well, it's interesting because I'm paying attention, and I've created a kind of a mailer, and I've also posted it on LinkedIn a couple times, just links, NMHC, the Apartment Association, everywhere we're trying to find as much information and resources and tracking, it was interesting to see a number of the tracking companies have been coming out recently with the data of who's paid, because I hosted a national call 2 weeks ago, and everybody was, we had lenders on the call, and we had owners and operators and brokers, and it was interesting to hear everybody, because everybody was talking about April 1st collections, and people were saying, I had guys on the call that were saying it's going to be 25% collections, or it's going to be 25% down, so 75% collections. What we ended up finding out, I think NMHC did a study of about 14 million. You probably saw that, 14 million 3, and I think they came up with a 74% number. And I saw another group that did the same thing, and they were in the mid 70s as well. And talking with some of our owners and operators, we had some really creative owners. One of our owners did a raffle 2 weeks before April 1st, saying, whoever pays in full today, I'm going to put all of those rents into a raffle, and we'll draw out a few tenants, and you'll get your rent back. So they actually got, I think they were 70% collected before April 1st. Some of the other owners we've talked to they've offered vouchers to, $50 off or a small percentage off if you pay by April 5th. The next few things people have done is depending on the need or depending on what the tenant status is with their current situation, their job, their income, they were giving, they were deferring 30, 60, 90 days, certain percentage of the rents. And then some of the owners were converting, and probably will be doing that in May. I think May 1st is going to be the critical time where we're really going to see how deep this is, because a lot of the tenants had the ability or might have had the money in March before all of the shelter in place and stay at home and the quarantines and lockdowns happened. They might have had their rent money for April. So I think April isn't going to be that significant of an indicator. May, I think, is going to be the real indicator as to how strong the multifamily market is and what is actually going to happen as far as collections. Another thing is I've noticed that some of the owners are utilizing security deposits. Those that are accepting security deposits, they may be utilizing a portion of those security deposits or the entire security deposit for April or for May 1st rent. Depending on the state that you're in, you definitely have to make sure you understand the laws of security deposits and how that can be adjusted, but that might be another solution to the, what we're seeing is the potential to have significant delinquencies in the multifamily space.
Yeah, it might definitely help bridge the gap. I'm just wondering though, so what would they require the tenants to make up the security deposit on the back end, or what's kind of the chatter about that you're hearing?
With the security deposit, the solution hasn't been created yet. That's more of the creative way to make sure that you get through it, and this is again assuming it's going to be a short period. If it ends up where shelter in place goes into July or August, it's a whole new set of issues that you have to deal with. Yeah. But with those security, because many of the owners that I talk to, and they don't accept security deposits here in Illinois specifically because of the strict guidelines and the fact that they have to all be in interest-bearing accounts, and you have to collect all of that interest and make sure that the tenants, you distribute that. They've kind of gotten around that by doing move-in fees and move-out fees. It might not be an option for a lot of owners and operators to utilize any kind of a security deposit, but it's a good question that you ask. What would you do after this? Whether you would, slowly have them have like a reserve to get back into each month. That might be a good solution if you want to build up the security or the security coffer again.
So, given the circumstances, what kind of advice would you give to, new people out there that are looking at getting into real estate, or even those that started, last year and they're still trying to get through, their first or second deal right now?
Well, the people that are starting, I think this is the best time. I brought on a junior in 2009, and I remember telling him at that time, this is the absolute best time. You don't want to start in the real estate business in a hot market, because by the time you learn, because the way I look at it is the first couple years you're in it, it's like, I liken it to grad school, where don't expect to get paid. It's just you don't have to pay like you do in grad school, if you're in the real estate industry. But I think it's always better to start in a market like this, where you can just be a sponge and absorb as much as possible, learning about the business, starting to create a database. This is the time, the database. This is the time to do the research. This is the time to get your systems in order. Because when you're in the daily grind, as you know, when your head's down, you're looking at deals, you're deal maintenance, you're talking to owners, and you're trying to work through specific acquisitions. You don't have time to say, okay, let me go and do the research and build up my database and make sure these phone numbers are correct, and make sure I know exactly who owns what property in my market. This is the best time to do it. So if you're just starting or you're 2 years in, you need to take this time to really, do the things, start CCIM classes, watch podcasts like this to learn more information that, you wouldn't have time to really do this. So I'd say take advantage of this time.
So are there any book recommendations that you'd have?
Well, the first one, I'd say if you're new to the business, is definitely Rich Dad Poor Dad, Robert Kiyosaki. It's just a no-brainer. I would have, if I had kids in high school, I would have them reading that book. Kids in college, just because it totally makes you think differently about, the fact that our parents. My parents were both teachers, so they were exactly what Robert Kiyosaki was talking about, where they said, all right, go to school, go to college, get good grades, try to get a job, get benefits. And that book just makes you totally flip what security actually is, because I've known so many people that worked for a company for 20 years. When the downturn hit, they were let go. And how secure is that? I mean, yeah, okay. So for 20 years, they had healthcare, they had, everything associated that you would consider security. And then that book really makes you understand what security really is. So that's a good one. I just read a recent book called 10% Happier. And it was a book on meditation. It's something that I've wanted to really learn how to do, and I have a hard time, as I'm sure many people out there do, is even if you take 5 minutes a day and you try to clear your mind, it's like I'm always thinking about, what do I have to do next? Or, after this, even if you're doing 5 minutes, what am I going to be doing? What do I need to get ready for the day in the 5 minutes? And so that book, and it was a great book, talks about how meditation made him 10% happier in life. And that little 10% made a huge difference. So those are two that come to mind that I can always go back to and say they were fantastic books to read.
All right. So how could our listeners get in touch with you if they wanted to reach out?
Well, they can reach me. I've been really active on LinkedIn, so you can find me on LinkedIn. Or you can email me. My email is reid.bennett@svn.com, and Reid is REID. Bennett, BENNETT, at SVN, SamVictorNancy.com. Or you can, my cell phone, 773-251-7342.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Reid, for joining us today. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
I appreciate it, Dion. Thank you.
Looking forward to doing it again in the future.
All right. Have a great day.